Hey guys, how's it going? On today's video, we're going to start the series on how to take apart your E30. This is my 1987 325 IS. It is automatic, so it's a little different than a manual trans. But as we go through the process, pretty much everything's the same for late model and early model cars. For late model, the bumpers are a little different, but I'll get into that as well. So this is going to be a multi-part series. I'm going to cover each section in its own video. I'm going to begin with front end, and then we'll get to the motor, we'll get to the rear end, we'll get to the full interior. Everything underneath the car is coming out. That's what we're going to do. Let me put you on a tripod, and let's get started taking the front end apart. So before I get started, I know people are going to be like, oh, let's go over the tools and whatnot to what you need to take apart an E30. There's really no special tools. The only thing special would be maybe some of the e-torque stuff, which I have right here. It's like 15 bucks at Harbor Freight. But you don't need power tools. You don't need anything crazy. All I'd say is this kit I've been using for like 3 years now. It's from Amazon. It's like, I think it's like 80 bucks at its cheapest. And it pretty much gives you everything you need. You got, three different size ratchets, all your sockets, a bunch of different screwdrivers and bits, and a bunch of wrenches. Power tools are great and make the job go a lot quicker, but not really necessary. But other than that, this kit will pretty much get you going. I'll put a link in the description if you're looking for a cheap toolkit that gets it all done. Harbor Freight also sells a kit. I'm happy with this one. And then other than that, and besides the e-torques for like the trans and stuff, a good Allen set is nice, but you can also use these keys and some wobble extensions and just some extensions. But that's pretty much it. Nothing special for the E30. Luckily, this is what I'm using, and probably a Milwaukee stubby impact, which is great. And then also jack stands. You'll need a jack. If you're going to take the engine out from the top, you're going to need an engine hoist and a load leveler. That makes life super easy. One of these, also from Harbor Freight. I'm going to be taking the motor out from the bottom, so dropping the whole assembly as is. So I'll be using a table cart, also from Harbor Freight. This is their smaller of the two. They have a 300 and 500 pound. Probably should have got the 500, but that one does the job. So I'll be getting the whole front end nice and high with no lift, and then dropping it out the front. Also, so there's multiple ways of doing everything. Works for me. There might be a better way to do it, or I'm doing it the wrong way, but it works for me, so I'm still going to do it. The only thing different really is going to be the bumpers are a little different, front and rear. Obviously, the front valance, or the cow catcher, down here is different than a normal valance. But, the engines are all the same. Interiors are all the same. And all the body panels are all the same. The only main difference really is the bumpers on how they come off. So, once we get into that, we'll do the difference. But other than that, let's get started. So, first thing we're going to do, get the hood off. Just go ahead and pop the hood. So, what we got here are bunch of 10 mils, 3 10 mils on the actual hood. You have a grounding strap, and then over here we have the hinge, which is just a simple clip right here, and then we have the windshield washer fluid, which actually is already disconnected, which is nice. So we're already missing that, but that's usually just a screwdriver clip, which is usually loose enough to get with your hand, and then this whole piece is just tucked in here, which comes right off. And then you have the little bib that you'll run all the way through here and make sure that's disconnected. Okay, so we'll take this clip off right here. A little pressure on the hood so it doesn't fall. It's right there. So you see a little clip, and then this pin just comes out like that. And then what I do is I will push this back and down. Then we will slide this hose out, up and over, let it sit, and we'll go ahead and shut the hood. Go ahead and pull these 3 off, 3 more 10s. 3, 1, 2, 3. We'll come to the other side. So if you can go ahead and grab both sides, you'll lift up, pull forward, nice and up. Now that the hood's off, we'll go through and get all these clips out for the grills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then there's 2 screws. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 on each. So get that done real quick. So here we go. Got a screw in here. Right there. Go this way. 1, 2, 3. And then this just comes right out. Same thing with this. This doesn't have any screws at the bottom, so it's just the 2 clips on top. And then this simply comes off. And then I'll go ahead and get this side done. Okay, now we're gonna go after the headlights. So it's the same thing for late and early model. You have one at the top and then one on each side. As far as the connector, they're a little different, as I'll show you. Just go ahead and get the sides off first. Just a Phillips head screwdriver. Normally, some people replace them with 10 mils. That's what they will typically look like. I'm just putting all my hardware in a bucket because I'm going to send it off to get coated. I know where all the 99% of the bolts go anyway. But if this is your first time doing it, highly recommend labeling it so you know where the bolts go. I typically use, let's see, one of these from Harbor Freight, and then my first time I went through and labeled each individual bolts. So I remembered when I was reassembling the car, were they wet? We'll slide this out carefully. This is what the typical connector looks like for early model, and you'll just easily wiggle it out. These are aftermarket headlights, so it's got a pigtail to this, but again, same thing, and you're just gonna wiggle it out slowly. They will break. Most people upgrade from early model to late model. Oh, it's just like that, which is simply you cut the connector off, splice in the other one. These have 3 wires, but you only end up using 2. There's plenty of write-ups online on how to do that, so I will not go into detail. It's just like that. Headlights are out. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and get the cow catcher off. You can leave the fog lights installed, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna come around here, zoom in a little bit, turn the flash on. So there's 1 on each fender well. So you're gonna there's 1 there. And then there's a few tucked up in here. Let's see if we can get a good view of this. Let's see, you can see that one right there. There's 1 there, and that's right in the middle. There's 1 at the bottom, and then there's 1 again up there, 1 at the bottom, and again there's 1 right there and 1 at the bottom. The best way to get to them is you can actually get to them right here, like just sticking a ratchet through here, and then 1 from the bottom. Let's see if you can see that. It's hard to see, but you can get, there's a slit here, so you can get a ratchet through on each one of them. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 8, 9 bolts. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those off and show you when it's off the car. Okay, well, with that out, we can finally go through everything. So there is a bracket on the inside of the fender well right here. That's your first 10. You kind of have to pop this out and slide this tab down out of the side trim. Then you also have a 10 here, which connects. Whoop, I gotta get you going. Which connects right there. You also have your 1 on top, 1 on the bottom. This one happened to be broken, which they commonly are. So this connects like this. There's your 10 top and bottom. There's no bottom in the middle. You have your top and bottom. You can see how this one is still intact. And then you have your last one right there. And then just like on the other side, you have your bracket right there, which has fallen off. And then you have your clips for your pigtails for the fog lights, which are right here, which are just squeeze. You'll have a better idea of this one right here. See if you can see in there. Oh, okay, cool. If you see in there, let's go. Let's do that. Turn the light on. You just squeeze and then pull, and then take that out. And then I guess there is a corner light, which was also plugged in, which is cool. So, cow catcher's off. Now we'll need 13s for the front bumper, which are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that pulls everything out. Unlike the plastic bumpers, which you will first, there's 2 star bits underneath, one right here and one right here. You'll pull those 2 really long bolts out, and your whole bumper will just slide off. And then you'll get to the bumper shocks, but it's easier just to get the bumper shocks off in one. And if your late model bumper or early model is like it, some do tucked, so you'll only have about this much metal showing right there, so the bumper will be all the way shoved in. All you need to do is grab from underneath on both sides and just yank as hard as you can, and you should pull the bumper back out, and then you can get underneath and get those 10 mils or 13 mils. Well, unfortunately, my phone either didn't record or the footage got lost, so I'm missing the rest of the front end and a little bit of the engine bay teardown. So I'm going to do my best to walk you guys through it with just photos. So last off, we took the front bumper off. Now, if you have an early model, you'll have this trim that goes along the top of it. If you have a late model, you won't have this, but there's 8s all the way in the front. And then if you remove the side marker lights, there's an 8 behind that, and then there's also an 8 or there's an 8 in the fender well on the back, and those just fall off super easy. All right, now that the front trim is off, we can go ahead and take off the valance. For an early model valance, if you go to where the fender meets the valance, you either have a 8 mil on the top and bottom of where it meets the fender, or you'll have a T20 or T25 Torx bit. Go ahead and remove those. You'll have 4 8 mils attaching it to the core support. You'll have 2 in the middle, right above the frame rails where the bumper shocks go in, and you'll have 2 below that. Early model, you can just get to them and you won't have an issue. Late model, you will need to pull the brake ducting off the valance, pop those out. You don't need to take the fog lights out, but you will need to pop the brake ducts out to get to those lower 8 mils, and then that whole piece comes right out. Now we're going to get to our AC system in the front here with our aux fan. Please, before you take your car apart, if the AC works, go take it somewhere to have the AC suctioned out, which will make the job a lot easier. And don't, if you're going to do it inside and you're just going to pop it, don't do it inside. It is illegal to release refrigerant into the air, so that's just a disclaimer. But just don't pop it inside, because that's going to suck and you don't want to be breathing that stuff in. So once the system is drained, we have 2 10s in the engine bay, right behind the radiator. We have a clip holding in the fan to the chassis harness, so go ahead and undo that. And then you have some Allens going to the lines, one that's going all the way to the compressor, and then you have one that's just going to the dryer, which is held in by 2 10 mils, and you can go ahead and disconnect all of the harnesses from the dryer, which is, obviously that's on screen now. So once you have the the two lines disconnected that go to the condenser. The condenser and the fan, you could pull that out after you pull the radiator. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the radiator, which early model is held in by two 10 mils on either side of the radiator. Late model is held in by a bracket on top, which is just two 10s, and then you could take that out. Go ahead and drain the coolant. Most radiators, it's on the driver's side on the bottom. Sometimes it is on the passenger side. So go ahead and drain your coolant. If you have a early model, you will have a expansion tank on the passenger side. Go ahead and I believe that's held in by two 10s. Undo it and lift it up and make sure all of that coolant drains out before you pull your radiator. Make sure all the coolant's out of the expansion tank first, and then you can take your radiator out and undo the hoses. If you have a late model, it's going to be on your driver's side. Same principle, make sure that's empty before you take any of the hoses out, just so that most of it can filter into the radiator and you don't make a big mess. Go ahead and remove the lower radiator hose from the passenger side and the upper radiator hose from the driver. I typically will leave the lower radiator hose attached to the motor, but I will take the upper radiator hose with the radiator. A little weird, but that's just how I do it. So pull those out. Go ahead and take the radiator out, and then you can go ahead and take your aux fan and your condenser out. There's also, usually you'll have a horn possibly in the front. Those are held in by either 10 or 13s. You can pull that off, and that will pretty much get you the whole front end taken apart. Now for the engine harness going into the chassis, we'll go ahead and remove the ECU from the glove box. So go ahead, open your glove box. You don't need to remove it. You will need to remove the two Phillips screws at the top there. I'll go ahead and in the pictures here put some diagrams. You also have a twist clip on the passenger side right in the middle there, and then we'll also have another twist clip towards the HVAC unit. Go ahead and pop those off, and then the panel will drop. You'll go ahead and see your ECU. Go ahead and remove the wiring itself. So all you have to do is pull the wire out, or the clip out, and it'll pop the harness off the ECU. And then you'll have, if you have an early model, you'll have three single pin connectors that you will just pull out. If you have a super early model like 85, 86, you'll have a green box that you'll also have to disconnect. And then if you have a late model, you should only have two clips you need to disconnect, which are all attached right there. And then go ahead and feed that through the firewall. And if you want to drop your ECU, go ahead and remove the 410 mils all the way around it, and that just falls right out. Now what we have to do is take apart most of the driver's side of the engine. We'll go ahead and remove the airflow meter, which is a few 10s. You'll have a bracket on going to the actual chassis of the car, two 10s, and you'll have a clip or a big hose clamp going to the elbow. So go ahead and remove the airbox with the airflow meter attached to it all in one, and then we'll go ahead and remove the intake elbow, another big hose clamp, and it will have some vacuum lines attached to it. Be careful, don't break that. Those go to your brake booster and to your throttle body. So carefully take those apart, and that will leave us with the engine, half of it mostly taken apart. And then we'll go ahead and take the exhaust off, get the car jacked up. Go ahead, if you have an OEM exhaust, you'll have two hangers in the rear, two rubber hangers, and a actual like clamp hanger. Those are 13s. and you could just let that hang in the rear or put a jack underneath it and hold it, and then come back to the front. And those are 14s or 15s, depending how many times someone's changed it in your car. And then you can go ahead and lower the exhaust from there. And now we should all be caught up. For the rest of the series, I shouldn't have missed anything. It was just in the beginning that I had some missing footage. So let's continue with the video. Okay, well, sometimes getting an exhaust off is a little difficult. The two 13s in the back, super easy. The 13 up front here, super easy.
The 14s on the header flange bolts, not so easy.
Sometimes they strip. Sometimes when you undo the nut, the whole stud actually comes out. Fortunately, mine stripped and didn't want to come off, so tried to cut the nut off. Nut didn't want to come off, so I had to cut the actual flange on the header. Not a big deal, but that sucked. So now I'm going to get to doing the under tray. So here with the under tray, this is what we're going to be taking off. This is a trans brace, so leave this. This is a chassis brace, so you can take that off. We're going to take this under panel off, which you don't need to undo here. You can just undo it in the back here. Tens all the way around. And then this whole piece will come off as one. And then we can get to removing the drive shaft from the diff first, then the front, and then the last few bits in the front. Motor's coming out. Okay, here are the drive shaft bolts. There are 4/17s. You're gonna want your e-brake up, and the car, if it's an auto, in park, or if it's a manual, just throw it in gear. It makes it easier to get off. Or let's say you had the rear wheels on the ground so that they didn't spin. So you'll go through those. I recommend kind of going two and then the two here, so make it flat, and then do the other two. And then for the front here, drive shaft, the rear drive shaft bolts are out. We'll get to the front. So these again, 17s. You can leave the e-brake down and the car in neutral so that you can spin if you have an impact. If you don't have an impact, then you're gonna need to leave it in gear. So you will put a 17 behind, typically go up this way in the back, and then you'll 17 here, zap them off. So I would just do, I mean, you could do either or. Usually easier for me is to do the actual bolts that are on the drive shaft itself. And then once we do that, we'll get the 13s right here, and it'll fold in like a V in the middle, and you should be able to pop it off. You could also just kind of let it dangle. When you actually pull the motor, it'll drop. And then we'll get to taking this pin off the selector rod for the automatic trans. If you had a manual, right up there is usually a 13 or a 12 is your shifter arm, which will go up there, and you'll undo the 12 or 13 and then slide the bushing forward, and then you can just let your shifter drop. If you are going out the top, not dropping your motor, there's going to be a clip on the transmission called the clip. What you'll need to do is take a long screwdriver and try to flick it up. If you watched my video on the solid mount install, which will be right here, it shows you what that clip is. But other than that, we'll do the last 13s on the trans, get that held up, and then we'll finish up with the front, and this puppy should be ready to go. So you can see here, the drive shaft is dangling. After I took those two 13 mils, typical center support bearing was bad, although the car did drive pretty well. There was a little stuttle. So you'll do this and then kind of just finagle it back and forth, and then the drive shaft will fall. I ended up taking the trans brace off, just going to the bolts easier, and you can see here, have that off as well. So I'm gonna get the drive shaft out, but then we'll finish up front and we'll drop this puppy. Okay, now for the last few things. Let's say if you're gonna be taking the motor out from the top, the last things you need to do is remove the 13 mil ground strap. We have our two heater core hoses, and then obviously you'll remove your power steering reservoir yourself. And then you have your two trans mounts, or motor mounts, excuse me, on both sides, which are 16s or 17s. and then you'll angle it and then scoop it out. Typically what happens is the power steering bracket gets caught, or the AC condenser compressor gets caught up here. So if it's easier to take those off, I'd take them off if you can. But other than that, all this stays with the motor and everything will come out nicely. If you have an oil cooler and you're taking it out from the top, obviously disconnect it. Those are like 24 or 25s. And that's about it. Besides this little charcoal canister, which goes underneath your intake manifold, and you can just kind of pull down on it. And your charcoal canister, all you'll need to do is undo the electrical connector on it, which is just a push and pull. And then we're also just gonna undo the clamp on your canister and pull that out. Again, if you're coming out from the top, also recommend just moving this out of the way. But other than that, you're ready to go. We're gonna be dropping out the bottom. So the last few things on the motor, and then we'll leave the struts for last. We'll do our brake lines, which is an 11 and a 14. We'll get rid of all the, oh, you can't see anything. There we go. A 14 and 11. We'll get rid of the ABS line, and I forget what the other one is, but they're both useless on both sides. And then the last 4 bolts for the subframe, which are 17s, and this whole thing will just drop out. Also, forgot to mention the 17s on the F cabs. And then lastly, if you have a manual trans, I recommend taking off the clutch line, or you can just, if you don't want to rebleed the system, just pull the slave off, which is 2 13s, which is on the driver's side of the trans. It's like right there. Or you can take the line off. A lot of fluid is going to come out, so expect that. And then we have our fuel lines. So most models, they're either going to be here and here, or here and here. As you can see, this one, they are on 2 different sides. So we'll take this one off, which is your return line, and then the main line should be kind of hiding its way back. Interesting, it's actually on the back side. So we'll get that off and that one off on the other side, and then it should be ready to go. Little fuel will come out. If you want to, take one of the bolts you've already taken off the car and stick them back in these 2 lines, and then it won't leak as much and you won't have to be smelling a bunch of gas fumes. So those are last, just because they are fumey, and we'll get this done. Pretty much everything off. Fuel lines are off. The 2 heater core hoses are off. If you're dropping it from the bottom, you will need to disconnect the steering shaft, which is an absolute pain. So it's 2 13s. There's one at the bottom, one at the top. Typically it's easier to get to the one at the top, but you really do need to clear out this whole thing, and you really have to get it off. But what I do, since I'm going to be upgrading to a Z3 rack anyway, is I just cut them where they connect, right in the middle, which is already one step of doing the 3 or E36 steering rack upgrade. Also check out the video right there. For the power, for automatic trans, there's a little bracket right there you're going to want to get rid of. I got all the brake lines disconnected. 13 bottom, or 14 bottom, 11 top. I just use like an old water bottle, cut the top off, and then cut a little slit for a zip tie to go through. And let that hang and drain out. I got the 17s off the F cabs right here. Now I'm going to go through and get the 17s, the 4 17s off the subframe. I got my table cart underneath, all pumped up, as far back as it'll go. I still have the trans jack on. I will loosen that once this is all start ready to go. And then right before I do the 4 bolts, I'm going to do the 13s on here, let them drop, and then this whole thing will drop right out. So I'm going to put you on a stand, and we'll get this motor out. Oh, fantastic, I bumped it. Anyway, motor's out. Time to jack the car up and get this thing out. Okay, now, if you have a lift, this is super easy. All you need to do is raise the car up, and this will drop from the bottom. Since I don't have a lift, this is what I'm gonna do. The rear wheels will go back on the ground, which will start to tilt the car up, and then I'll take a Harbor Freight low profile jack, which I believe is on, it's in the back. Let's see. I'll take, this is a long reach low pro jack. I will use a race German bushing so I don't mess up the pinch welds. And from about the middle of the car, I will jack it up. I will use that with some boards on the bottom because it's not as tall. And then we'll just lift this thing sky up. And we will be able to simply, unfortunately, again, since this doesn't come off, yes, you could cut it and do all that. Not gonna do that. So, and then we'll just drag this puppy out. And just like that, complete drivetrain is removed. Highly don't recommend doing this, but if you got no other option and you want to drop it from the bottom, we won't talk about it. So there we go. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for episode 2. We'll do the rear end. And yeah, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at The Mass Driver. If you guys need any parts, E36 M3, Z3M, E30, let me know at Rage It Parts. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.